How many of you would like to be retired someday? Yes, I know I would. So this is my mom. She's a retired teacher. That's where she is right now. So she's in Florida, and I talk to and some of you know this from November. I talk to my mom every day because I'm an only child, so don't judge me. All right? Talk to my mom on the way in, and my father, they're down in Florida right now, so my father is obsessed about the weather around me. And so he's texting me in the morning, and now where do you have to go? What do you have to do? So I'm talking to my mom on the way in here today. So I'm staying in and she goes, now wait a minute. She goes, the last time you were down there doing something like that, wasn't there weather too? And I'm like, yeah. And she said, well, maybe it's you. And I thought, okay, well, sorry. Maybe it is me. I'll take it. So I did tell her that we were going to be talking about standards and kind of taking it to the next level of teaching points. And she said, remember that time Paige fell asleep at the couch? She goes, I hope they don't do that to you today. So hey, thank you again for being here. And I know this isn't necessarily the most exciting of topics, but it is important to know that it is moving the work forward. So when we think about the goals that we have today, really want to give you an update on where we are in the process statewide, and so you know how the work we're doing here fits into that. We're going to look at the curriculum model really briefly again, just to kind of review that. We're going to look at some of the work that's been done to date, so you will, the representative groups that came together to prioritize the standards, you'll get to see some of that work and where it is, and then have some experiences working with that. We'll also look at prioritizing standards, look at developing teaching points, what are they? And the math and ELA groups started that work. You'll continue to move that work forward today, and we'll keep going with that towards the summer. And obviously the overarching goal is to continue to build capacity. So raise your hand if you're going to help us by facilitating today. We've got folks in here. Thank you for doing that. So what we're trying to do is build that capacity around the region. So bring people together, provide some professional development, and have them work with you. And then we'll talk about where we're going next, which will be a little bit different than what we thought because we don't have all 6 of the districts together today. So we'll keep working on that. How's the volume back there? Can you hear me? Okay, Dave? Okay, good. So just so you know, I circled the Cap Region BOCES there. So we have 18 BOCES and the city of Syracuse participating in this partnership statewide to roll out the next generation math and ELA standards. And one of the things that's very interesting is that we've been going around the state to talk to the different BOCES and share with them what we're doing in Schoharie County and how you all as 6 districts are working together and what you're doing. And since we've done that, now we haven't met with all of those starred BOCES there, but since we have all the ones that are circled want to do something like you're doing here, which is really cool because we're able to take what we have worked with your folks to create and to make better and then share it with other BOCES around the state. So we're turning Schoharie into a verb. We're going to Schoharie them, kind of. No? Okay. Too soon? Thank you. Right. All right. So, okay, here we go.
Do you really care what we think anyway? Hasn't this already been done for us?
Oh, great question. So, yes and no. So part of this work is really spending time digging into the standards and really making it so everybody has a deep understanding. So like Dave mentioned last time with the Common Core rollout, it could have gone better, I think is probably a good understatement, right? We had this idea of teacher-proofing things, not we, but the state, approved new standards and then handed out the modules, and that worked in some places. It didn't work in the vast majority of places because it was kind of like handing people a script and saying, do this. And that doesn't always go so well, and it didn't. So the way we're approaching it this time is instead of trying to teacher-proof things like here, read the script, really more about trusting teachers and everybody in schools really to do their jobs. And that involves really 4 major pieces. And we're going to focus on these two today, the prioritizing standards and the writing of teaching points. But really, if you think about how the work is being organized, it really is teacher-centered. Yeah, I'm standing up here from BOCES talking to you right now, but the real work that you're going to do is led by your colleagues. And that, I think, has made one of the biggest differences in this work. The other thing is that everybody's having some common experiences, because last time one of the issues was you sent people away to Albany, they got some experience with the work, but then that may or may not have come back to individual BOCES and individual districts, which really eliminates the possibility of any kind of buy-in. So here's what we've we didn't show this in November because I don't think we really knew exactly how the whole thing was going to fit together, which I think on some level should give you comfort that it isn't like we decided from the beginning this is how it has to be and we're marching through this path. It isn't. We've made changes and we've altered things as we've gone. And I think one of the things that we landed on that really has made sense is this pattern that we're kind of in now. So it's everybody comes together in November. Then we have groups of representative teachers do some deep work on some of the stuff. So we had groups, a math group and an ELA group, come together at the end of February, beginning of January to really get into prioritizing the standards. Now we come back together as a big group. It would have been a big group at Cobleskill, but we're figuring that out. Come back together, then everybody gets a chance to experience what work went on with the prioritizing of the standards. And then next, in the spring and summer, those representative groups will again continue working. And then we'll come back together, everybody, in the fall. So it's this pattern of everybody's involved, but we have small groups doing some of the work. Does that make sense? It's not necessarily rocket surgery. That was funny, right? No? But it is something that was missing the last time. This didn't go on, where you had that sort of recursive process and that alternating of everybody and then small groups. And just as a reminder, this is the complicated model that we're using, and right now we're focused on those middle navy blue rectangles, and more explicitly, the writing of the actual standards-based curriculum. So we're here. The goal is to get here at the end of it. So at the end of it, we want every teacher to have access to a high-quality standards-based curriculum down to the teaching point level, which we'll talk about today, and then you'll have some experience looking at teaching points later on. And we actually just met with a vendor that we're working with called Educational Vistas, and they are creating for us, basically from scratch, a platform using the work that we've been doing as a region, as a basis, so that everybody will have access to prioritized standards, teaching points, and then the ability to create units based on those. So this is something that we're really hoping is going to help level the playing field so that everybody has access to the great work that we're doing here. So it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of work to do. So there's Paige with the trap bar at the gym, right? So, and just so you think we're not just posing this picture, oh, that's right, yep. So it is heavy, and that's one of the reasons why bringing everybody together to share in the work makes sense. I mean, I get that each district is unique and you have your unique needs, but I'm not so sure second grade ELA is that much different between two neighboring districts. So a lot of that work can be shared. And I think we're starting to see the benefits of that, where we have a ton of work that's already been completed in the Google Docs that you'll see today around prioritizing the standards and developing the teaching points. So again, this is our pattern. Everybody works together, then representative groups, and then we do that. So you have a copy of this diagram in there. And this actually we kind of put together after we got down the road in this process and started to see what was working and what wasn't. So you can see kind of how this will just continue as we move forward in the process. And a couple of the things that have been really important to this that I think often have gotten left out of other processes. If you look at the blue shapes, so the blue rhombus there on the first one, I taught high school math. Geometry was my favorite. I'm not going to call it a diamond. It's definitely a rhombus. So if you look at the first rhombus, that is one of the first things that your superintendents did was get together and talk about how they want to do this. So I think that's important to realize, and Dave mentioned it too, that your superintendents, the superintendents in the 6 districts that are working together, came together and committed to do this work. And then you see that blue rhombus appear again a couple of different times. So after this day happens, your superintendents will get together, we'll meet with them, we'll talk about how things went, what went well, what we need to do differently. I'm sure we'll have some conversations about how do we duplicate this experience for other districts. That's one of the reasons why we're recording it. So if you're watching it on the webinar, yay, good times. All right, my head is very bald and very shiny on here, by the way. So those blue shapes also really are to kind of pull out that's work that administrators are doing, which was also something that was missing last time, because you had school administrators the last time around who may or may not have really been deeply involved and had a good understanding of what their teachers were doing and what was going on. So we added that into this process, where we did half-day trainings in, I think, January, where all the administrators came and we took them through abbreviated versions of the entire process so they understand exactly what we're doing at every step. And the feedback from them was very positive, that they appreciated knowing what was happening, they appreciated having the similar experiences that the teachers are having, and I think it makes a big difference. And then the orange shapes are where teachers are working and are involved, and you can see the rectangle is facilitator training. So the folks who, thankfully volunteered to facilitate or showed up and then we told them they were facilitating. That happened to a few people. And everybody's been really good sports about it, which is super cool. And so that's one of the things we do. So we bring teachers together, we work on training with them so that they can then facilitate the work with their colleagues. And one of the things that is really important to know is that it isn't like a teacher commits at the beginning of the year and they have to do every single part of this process as a facilitator or doing regional work. That's not the idea. We want to make it so people can come in and out of the process. So if you decide you might like to facilitate something later on, just let the folks in the district know, and we can definitely work people into the process. The more, the merrier. It's designed, remember, to build capacity within the region. So the more people we have taking leadership roles and learning things at a deeper level, the better. And then you see the green circles are the shared experiences or the superintendent's conference days. So we see that pattern continuing into the fall. And then the gray ovals are where the BOCES is kind of involved in planning and supporting the districts who are involved in this. Does that make sense? It's much different from other processes I've seen across the state, and I work all over the state. Most of my administrative work was done in the Rochester area, but as we've been talking with people around the state, nobody's approaching it like this in this much of a systematic way. So why even prioritize standards? And I love this quote. And basically we prioritize because there's a lot of standards and not everything is as important as everything else. And we have a framework that we're using to prioritize standards, and you have a copy of this in your handouts. It's based on some work by a guy named Larry Ainsworth, and there's 4 categories that your colleagues looked at in January and February to determine whether or not a standard is a priority. The first one is readiness. So mastery of, so what we did is, so is a process, and your facilitators will talk about this too, is we had the folks in January and February go through the standards and really look at each one of them up against these 4 criteria and decide the extent to which they met those criteria. So is that standard something that's going to give students that essential knowledge and skills for future school success? So readiness is about school success. Sometimes it's okay to say, yeah, you need to know this because you need it for the next grade level or the next course. That's okay sometimes. Everything can't be about that, because then you start to lose people, but that's an okay reason for something to be a priority. And endurance. So is it something that will be of value beyond the school year? So after a student has exited from our system, is mastery of this particular standard something that will be important to their daily life. I think about things like being able to cite evidence from a text, right? That's something that you do throughout your life. You read something and you make a claim based on it and you can cite evidence from it. Maybe we're not using that language wrapped around it, but that's the skill that we're asking people to do, or that we often do as adults. The next one is assessment. So something that would help make a standard a priority is if it is heavily assessed. I mean, the tests are based on the standards, and if we know that certain things are emphasized more than others on the tests, then we want to make sure we identify those things as priorities. That's not necessarily teaching to the test. It's really just kind of living in the reality that we have. And what we have found, or what we've been told by the state education department over and over again, is that the emphasis on the different standards on the new assessments that'll come out in spring of 2021 is going to look similar to what's heavily assessed right now. So they're not anticipating any major shifts in what they emphasize. So we're able to use historical data to say, okay, these have been, historically heavily assessed, so we need to make sure we pay attention to them. And then the last one, leverage, is about something that would apply across disciplines. And I go back to that one about citing evidence out of a text. That's something we ask students to do across the curriculum or across the subject areas, not just in ELA. So what your colleagues did in January and February was look at all those standards and really just kind of check off if each standard met any or all of these, and then they had discussions about it, because not everybody necessarily agrees. So they worked on it and then arrived at priority standards, which you'll be able to see today. They'll show you that work that they completed in the Google Docs. Yeah.
Well, when we're talking about our whole focus is priority standards, but doesn't that make an assumption that we're being given standards that aren't necessary? Like, why are they giving us things that don't have REAL values already attached to them? Like, the fact that we're being given them as standards, doesn't that mean that they're the ones that are important because they're the ones that have already passed the rounds of tests to see whether or not they're important? Yep. So why are we at the point now where we're saying, oh, we've been given 10 standards, but we're only going to focus on 5? Does that mean that the other 5 are not important and that they're being included there as
fluff? No, great question. And the short answer is no, they're not fluff. And I think the answer from the state education department would be all of those standards are essential to hit at some point, but some need more focus than others. And when the folks did that regional work around prioritizing, what the work really does is you identify the priority standards, and then the other ones kind of fit underneath them. So they all end up getting, I hate to use the word covered, but they all end up getting hit over the course of a course or a school year, but maybe not all emphasized as much as others. Does that make sense?
So is our goal to figure out whether or not our curriculum is ensuring that it covers the top 5 and we don't worry about the bottom 5?
Louder, go ahead.
Those are the ones that aren't priority are still supporting standards, so we can't teach the priority standards without the supporting standards. It's like a railroad track.
How is it? Did everybody hear that? How is it like a railroad track?
We can't teach the priority standards without the supporting standards because it's like a railroad track. They support the priorities.
It's like a lot of the writing standards we didn't call priority because they're not assessed on it very often. However, they need to be able to write to cite evidence and all. Like, they still support all the others. They need to be taught, but those are the biggest ones that should take more time to focus on.
It just seems that our goal is that we've got standards that have already been condensed to the most concrete form as far as a checklist of things, and we've gotten rid of this other stuff. So it seems strange that we're going through and independently doing another layer of filtering. Why aren't we using this time to say, hey, here's the standards, let's make sure we're covering them, rather than saying,
that's what
oh,
we're doing.
we're not gonna cover all these.
Yep.
Because that's the message
No,
I'm getting,
but
is
we're
that
not- but we
we're
are-
not worried about the other one.
Yeah.
When are we doing
Yep, and that's a good point. And that is the work that's going to happen today. So and kind of continue. So that group came together and did that work of prioritizing and then sort of organizing them into priority standards and supporting standards. And then you'll get a chance to kind of look at that work and experience the conversation that goes into that. Not to do that work again because it's been done. So now it's getting into the teaching points, which we're going to talk about in a second. And that's exactly what you're talking about in terms of getting into, if these are the priority standards, what do we need to do as teachers to make sure students are able to demonstrate that they've mastered those standards? So, does that make sense? Kinda, sorta. So do you remember the example from the fall where I showed you the driving example? So let's see, since then, have we had any accidents since then? No, I don't think we have. So yeah, we're doing great. She just finished driver's ed, which is super cool. So now she'll be able to drive after 9. We're excited about that. So if you remember, we focused on the communication standard. I pulled that one out. So, and I showed you, we went through if that communication standard is important or if it's a standard we want to look at, what are the knowledge, skills, and understandings that a child or a person would need to demonstrate in order to show that they've mastered that particular standard with the driving. Just looking familiar? Ringing any bells? Good. So then, now we take this to the next level. So, but is it a priority standard? So if we're thinking about driving, and I stick with this driving example because I think, like I mentioned in November, I think sometimes if I give an ELA example or if I give a math example, the rest of us kind of tune out. I get that. I used to be a high school math teacher, and all the examples were always ELA. I'm like, here we go again. But there is an ELA one coming up. But anyway, I like the driving one because I feel like that sort of applies universally. So is this a priority standard? Well, okay. So here it is. Let's see. Readiness. So if you think about that communication standard, so let other drivers and pedestrians know which way you want to go, use your directional signals or horn consistently and at the proper times. So is that going to provide the student driver with essential knowledge and skills for future success? Yeah, I would say so. It's a big old check mark. All right, how about the next one? How about endurance? Is this going to provide value beyond just the passing of the road test? It should, right? They're communicating appropriately. Yep, I go with yes on that. And leverage. Does it apply? Now, this is an interesting one. Does it apply across multiple disciplines? So does this idea of communicating your intentions in an appropriate way apply beyond just driving? Anybody live with a teenager? Yeah, I'd say appropriate communication across disciplines, across areas is probably a thing. Focus on the word appropriate. And the last one, I did this order on purpose because when the groups got together to prioritize standards, they did those first 3 first and then waited and did the assessment piece last. Because the temptation is you look at what's emphasized on the assessment and say, yep, okay, that's it, we're done, without having the conversations and sort of the deeper thought about those other 3 parts. So the assessment thing is interesting. So there's the DMV road test evaluation form. You can't read it, but I'll blow it up bigger. And here are all the places where you can lose points based on communication. And it's fascinating how the DMV's approach to a road test is you start out with a certain number of points, and then they take points away until you don't pass. Like we approach things the complete opposite way in education, right? We want to build you up to the point of passing. DMV is like, nope, you start with this many, we'll take them away till you don't pass. So you have the opportunity, and you have to get 70 to pass. So if you add those up, 10, 20, 30, there's 40 points that are just to do with communication. So if you totally ignored the whole communication piece when you were teaching somebody to drive, they would fail, even if they did everything else correctly. So in my mind, that makes assessment, that's real. Ha, real, that's funny. I didn't mean to do that. So there it is. Okay, here we go.
But what happens if we don't finish prioritizing all the standards?
Oh, great question. If we don't finish prioritizing. Now, no one is expecting that all of this work gets done today. Remember back to the idea of the big group, small group, big group, small group? every time we bring people together, the work will move forward, but it isn't on you folks today to necessarily finish it. Because the idea is we keep everybody but involved in the process and knowing what's happening, and then we continue to move the work forward with the smaller groups. So if it's a priority, so if I think about that communication standard and it's a priority, what do I have to do to get her there? So when I was thinking about how my daughter learned to drive, and what would we have to do? So here's the standard. Let other people know. And then we start thinking about this idea of teaching points. So the teaching points are the answer to the question, what do I need to teach my students to do in order for them to meet that standard? So and I did alter it a little bit. Instead of I will teach, I put someone will teach Emma. Because I did a lot of it, but there were times when I had to tap out because, it's teenager. Yeah. So I wrote one. So the idea here, and you'll see this when you go to work with the teaching points and see some of the work that was done by your colleagues, is that there will be multiple teaching points for a standard, because it isn't just one thing. So here, I just picked out one tiny one. So the teaching point might be use the directional signals at the proper times. Okay? Fine. And I remember SWBAT, the student will be able to. I call it UBAT. Emma will be able to. I think that's funny, right? So, and then from that one teaching point, then you might have multiple lesson objectives. So in order to teach her to use the directional signals at the proper times, she has to use it to show which way she's turning. She has to use it at the appropriate amount of time before actually turning, because the people who turn it on a half mile before they're going to turn, we don't want that. Or the people who put it on at the last minute, to which my response is, it's nobody's business where I'm going. Right? Yeah, that joke never gets old. And then what to do, and then when to turn it off if it doesn't go off automatically, which is also super annoying, right? When people forget to turn it off. Okay, so we go from the standard to teaching points to lesson objectives, and then finally to the learning targets that are associated with each objective. So if I need to teach her to use it at the proper times, the learning target might be, I can use the signal to show which way I'm turning. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, well, why can't we just go from standard to lesson objective? And I would argue that that's probably the way many of us were taught in college. It was, here's the standard, write the student objective. And many folks probably did this step of thinking about what the teacher needs to do internally or intuitively, but it wasn't made explicit. And I think that's one of the good things about this process is we're really asking people to think explicitly about what they will do or what they need to do as a teacher to get students to meet to meet that standard. And from there flows the lesson objectives. Does that make sense? And you have an example in your packet of one of these done for, it was language arts, yep. So there she is, still communicating. Okay. Yeah, anyway. She's thrilled, by the way, that I continue to use that picture. All right. So here's that ELA example I promised that I keep using from 8th grade. So the standard is citing evidence to support an analysis. And here might be an example of teaching points. I have to teach my students to analyze the text. I have to teach them to evaluate evidence, develop ideas. These are things that I have to get the students to do. And then from each of those would derive lesson objectives and learning targets.
So how many teaching points do you think per?
The question was, how many teaching points per? I don't know. I think it depends. It depends on how complex it is, how complex the standard is. Maybe just a couple, but there may be ones that, if you think about like that, there's a lot going on in that standard. And you have to teach kids to do a lot of different things in order for them to be able to cite textual evidence to strongly support an analysis.
How can we possibly finish all the teaching points in 1 hour?
Right? So, yes. Can we have a nice big clap for that one? Yeah. Nice work. And we'll just leave it up there. Sorry, so people can see it. We had fun with that. So, and again, the answer is you're not expected to get it all done today. That's why we will bring people together over the spring and during the summer to continue to work on it. And it's that whole idea. Many hands make light work. There's a ton of work to do. There's no reason to duplicate it in different places. That's why we're bringing people together to do the work. And then we'll come back together in the fall. So today you're going to kind of review the idea of teaching points, or learn about teaching points. You're going to review the work that happened with prioritizing. And just as a disclaimer, the folks who are facilitating are doing just that. They don't have all the answers. We don't expect them to. They're helping do the process and helping folks have those common experiences with this work and with these processes so that everybody kind of knows what's going on while that work gets done. Mainly because once we end up at the end of this with units, we don't want people to be surprised at the components that are in there, or to wonder how we got to the point of, well, why are we focusing on this, and what's a teaching point, and how come this is like that. We want to make sure, folks, everybody has a solid understanding of the entire process and then what we end up with at the end. Okay. Yep.
Is there any sort of checklist, formats, framework, standards for how we're going to be doing this in order to make sure that there's consistency, to make sure that when I look at something from another school district, I'm not completely lost as far as what they're doing? And what incentive is there for me to provide my stuff to other people or for me to use their stuff?
Yep, and yes, and I'll answer the other one in a second. So in terms of a standard, yes, there is, because remember I talked about that platform that we're working on. So there will be common elements, and you're going to look at just look at, not actually do any work with it, but kind of react to the unit plan template and the different parts that are in there. So we're going to ask you as part of today, what do you notice about it? What do you think about it? Is there anything missing? Are there other questions about it? So and it's hard to describe without showing a picture of it, but really all the different components of that. So that will be consistent. And it's so funny to mention that, because when we were talking to the vendor yesterday about it, the one of the things that was really nice about it is by having some sort of common platform and all those elements in there, it will make it consistent across the region or forever, whoever is using it. And when it comes to sharing my stuff, what's the incentive? I don't know. I guess I kind of look at it as the rising tide lifting all boats. If there's things that you can put in there and things that you can get out, that's great. Remember, we're going to have that sort of consistent piece down to the teaching point and unit level. But then after that, I think the idea would be within the system, if you had a really great lesson that fit in a particular unit, we would invite people to submit those things and have them available as examples. But I don't necessarily see us having it laid out completely like this lesson, then this lesson, then this lesson, because that's really more about what happens at the school and classroom level. But we want to make sure we have examples in there of things that are good. And you folks might decide as a district, or even, with a couple other districts, to say, hey, let's go down to the lesson plan level and split up this work and share it. And maybe, these folks work on lessons for this particular unit, and we try things out, and we maybe switch them up. I think it's a squishy answer, but that's on purpose, because I don't necessarily know that we're exactly sure of what it looks like at the lesson plan level at the end, but we want to make sure people have access at the high level, at least to the teaching point portion, so that they can create lessons that definitely will hit the standards.
Are we going to have the standards presented in like a sequence of beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year? So that we can follow a similar progression?
Good question. Did everybody hear that question? Are the standards going to be kind of arranged? That's the work that we hope to get done this summer, or at least get started this summer, so that there can be a set of units for each course and grade level that you could use as a place to start. So you could say, if I did these 6 units in 6th grade ELA, it would cover the standards. And if I did that with Fidelity, it would get my students where they needed to be. And then you could choose the content that sort of undergirded each of those 6 units. So The plan, I mentioned it. That's where we are in terms of the plan. So here we're bringing everybody together to look at teaching points and prioritizing standards. Then the summer, the groups are going to come together, start to develop units. And like I said, no promises on how many of those get done. I think we really have to see how things fit together and how it works. And then there will be, right, Dave, a shared superintendent's conference day in the fall where, and I'm going to tell you right now, that's not planned yet. So unless it snows. It's like Jack Frost up here, right? So and it's not planned, and that's on purpose, because what we do in the fall is going to depend on how much work gets done in the summer. So we're doing this as we go because we want it to be meaningful and responsive to what's going on. And then during the winter and spring of next year, hopefully we finish these units. We've got people piloting things so that in the fall of 2020, particularly the folks in ELA and math, have units laid out and are able to use them at the beginning of that school year because the tests are aligned to the new standards in the spring of 2021. So that is where we're headed.
I have to do this over the summer?
Well, if you want. See, that's what's nice about this process is, like I mentioned before, we're trying to bring people in and out of this process at any time. So that if you say, if you've been somebody who's been involved as a facilitator since the fall, but you know what? You don't want to work in the summer. That's okay. And if you're somebody who hasn't been in any of like the regional groups yet, but you say you want to do it in the summer, great. Because what we've been doing at each step of this is we take who we have in the room and we work everybody up to a baseline set of knowledge and skills, and then they do the work. So I guess my message to you is if you haven't been like facilitating and been to the the facilitator trainings and stuff, don't worry. That doesn't mean you can't participate in other parts of this process. We want the more people involved, the better. With this idea of everybody together, small group, everybody, small group. And that's all I have to say about that. So any other kind of last minute questions before we get on to your logistical things of what's happening next? And like I said, just let me echo what Dave said. Thank you. First of all, thank you for coming in. Thank you for asking questions, because I think that makes the process better. Because if you have a question, I'm sure other people do too. And know that the BOCES is here to support this work, but we don't have all the answers. And we have made lots of course corrections as we've been going on with this process based on feedback from teachers and administrators. I tell you, part of the best parts of this process have been when we bring the facilitators together and they say, oh no, that won't work, we're not doing that. And then we fix it to make it into something that will work. So please, if you have a chance, definitely thank your facilitators for being part of that process. And I appreciate you participating in it because I know that that time is valuable.
So what if they don't necessarily agree with how we prioritize? How does that work?
The question was, what happens if people don't necessarily agree with how things were prioritized? I think I make notes in the document, and then what I imagine we do is over the summer, when we go to do those units, review it and take another look at it. Because those Google Docs are living and breathing when it comes to prioritizing and developing teaching points. And we want the folks who start that unit writing work in the summer to have all of the available information and thinking around the work that's been done. So please understand that any work that you do today is not just busy work. It's contributing to this whole process, and we're capturing it and using it moving forward.